All right, today we are here with Associate Professor Cody Telep from the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Cody, what is it that you study?
So most of my research centers on policing and broadly questions about what works in policing. So I'm very interested in the ideas of evidence-based policing in terms of what works best and what doesn't work. And a lot of the studies and research I did early in my career really focused on questions of crime control effectiveness and how can police best reduce crime. And that remains an important question, particularly as crime is increasing in a number of cities. But increasingly, I've also been looking much more at questions surrounding how can police build trust in communities and questions about police legitimacy, which perhaps are even more pressing now than ever, and thinking about, what do we know about efforts to build trust and reduce crime, ideally simultaneously in communities across the U.S.
That's a good answer, by the way. What's the most important thing that your research shows?
So we just finished up a study that we think is important, and hopefully will be viewed as important by both the practice and policy communities and the scholarly community, of course, as well. And so we were looking at efforts to integrate hotspots policing and focus policing efforts at places with procedural justice training. So in 3 cities, we were able to fully implement this before we ran into some COVID difficulties. We trained teams of officers on procedural justice and then assigned them to work in hotspots for a 9-month period and compared them to officers that we just sent to hotspots and didn't give any special training to. And what we found is that the trained officers behaved in more procedurally just ways. They treated people more fairly when we did ride-alongs and observed their behavior. When we surveyed residents of those locations, they perceived less police harassment and less police misuse of force after the intervention. And crime actually went down more in the areas where police were using procedural justice. And police made a lot fewer arrests in those areas. So, of course, we don't want to make too much of a single study, even though it was done in multiple cities, but we think this has important implications for thinking about efforts to try to build trust and increase effectiveness simultaneously.
What's the reaction been of police leadership to the findings you presented them?
So I think police are enthusiastic about this. They recognize the value of thinking about procedural justice training, and I think haven't always thought about it, how that could be integrated with their existing crime control efforts. And so I think sometimes there's this feeling that hotspots policing or focused policing efforts are inevitably going to lead to less trust, that people will see the police as an invading outside force, and that will hurt legitimacy. And so we argued in the study, and I think we now have some evidence to back that up, that hotspots policing is about where to go. It doesn't provide police with a single way of implementation. And so we think that police can be spending more time in places that have higher levels of crime, but doing that in ways that actually builds trust instead of damaging it. And so the reaction of police leaders so far has been enthusiastic, and we're excited to be able to share this more broadly in the coming weeks as we just wrap this up. And so, we think that there's, again, we don't want to say that procedural justice training solves all of your agency's issues, but we also think that this could be an effective model for other cities to think about implementing.
So let's shift a little bit to you. Why did you decide to become a professor?
Yeah, so I've been interested in policing and law enforcement for a while. I'm actually in college, had a chance in some classes to do some ride-alongs and an internship. And so, at first I thought I might want to go into law enforcement at the local level or the federal level, and then recognize that my skills might be better used to help do research projects rather than be out in the field. I'll leave that difficult work to many of our students that go on to careers in law enforcement. And I found that working with agencies, I really enjoyed the opportunity to ideally be helping them think through issues of practice. But I really found that I still had that opportunity to learn a lot about policing and spend a lot of time thinking about important issues related to policing and law enforcement, but from the researcher side. So that opportunity to work really closely with groups and ideally help contribute in ways to evaluating their strategies and ideally improving the way they deliver policing, that really drew me to this area. Plus, as you get a little less opportunity, I think, in your graduate school training to work as closely with students because you are a student. But as I've gotten to become a professor at ASU, the opportunity to work really closely with students through teaching and mentorship has been incredible. That's an amazing part of the job, and seeing students grow over time as I've now been at this for a while and had students, some of who started here in undergrad are now finishing grad school, is really rewarding and fulfilling.
So you're known as having quite a good reputation as a teacher. What draws you to teaching?
Well, I think probably being a nerd a little bit, I get really excited talking about these things. So I'm just thinking about conversations we've already had in the seminar on criminal justice class I'm teaching this semester. And yesterday I'm easily sidetracked in class, but usually it's sidetracked to something that maybe I didn't think we'd talk about. Yesterday, we spent almost an hour talking about police education, which is an area I found fascinating. And I got so excited that the students wanted to think about should police, have higher educational standards? Would this help in police professionalism? And so these sorts of discussions and debates I find really invigorating, and I always learn a ton from students. So, to me, I feel like I get a ton out of teaching and always am learning new ideas and new perspectives and thinking about things differently. But that opportunity to engage with these important topics and really talk through them, that to me is really exciting.
Right. So what's something about you that no one knows? What's your secret skill?
That is, I don't know if I have any particular secret skills. I have some useless trivia type knowledge. Like when I was younger, I'm still very interested in politics and the presidency and government and things. So when I was in first grade, I learned all the US presidents in order, which is something I don't know that I could do on the spot, but I'm pretty sure I could still name all the presidents. So I don't know that skill doesn't come in handy that often unless, it does if you're playing some sort of trivia game where you need to know the 23rd president or something, it can come in handy, but otherwise I don't know if that's exactly a skill.
So if I said the 23rd president, you could tell me who it is?
Well, I shouldn't have set myself up like that. The tough thing I think is to do it to name a number, is because then you kind of have to run through it all. But I believe the 23rd president, I think that would be Benjamin Harrison, because I think it would be between Grover Cleveland's 2 terms.
Wow, that's impressive. Whether it's true or not, it's
Cool,
impressive.
yeah.
I was just thinking it's 7 after Lincoln. So in any event, last question. What's the best advice you've either gotten or the best advice you can give students?
So whenever I'm asked about advice for students, I feel like the advice I give is sort of simple but important, and it's about going to class and doing the readings and preparing for class. And that, is, I guess, sort of obvious advice, but I find, when I've taught larger undergraduate classes, the students that sometimes are having the most difficulty, also are the ones who are showing up to class the least frequently. And I find that students that come to class tend to do much better and tell me, oh, it's so much easier to study when you've seen all the material. It's not really that hard to go back through things, and, they kind of come easily. And so, I certainly recognize that students have very busy lives and sometimes you're going to miss class, and that's okay. But I think, trying to make class as consistently as you can just makes it so much easier if you have an exam. All of that material will come back to you so much easier. And professor, our goal is to prepare you for those exams in class if you have an exam. So, it just makes your job much easier as a student if you're coming to class, doing the readings, and putting in that time in the front end. I think, then you're not having to cram all night, let's say, before an exam.
That's great. I mean, isn't there some line about 80% of life is just showing up?
Yeah, and I think that's right. Yeah.